Catus Maximus here, this time with just a quick review and comparison of some telecommunications, professional grade ratcheting telecommunications. That would be Ethernet and telephone crimpers. And even though we just have 3 crimpers here, these actually represent 3 of the primary design styles, such as side feed, we call these parallel or horizontal. We have vertical style, and we have end style. As telecommunications crimpers, all 3 of these integrate 3 common functions. It's interesting, 3 of them with 3 common functions, and that would be, or I should say 3 or 4, it depends. The amp is 3 and these other 2 are 4. 2 of the functions is crimping both 6-pin standard phone cable as well as 8-pin known as Ethernet cable. They also integrate wire cutters, which would be on that flat area there. And then you have wire strippers that are next to it. And on these ideals, these are the ratchet TeleMasters. You can see a trend with ideals such as the CrimpMasters and the StripMasters. Although their tools are nice quality, I wouldn't be the one to really determine if they're the master. Now, I like these TeleMasters, but they are quite heavy. And one of my criticisms is for such expensive crimpers and the overall heavy duty quality, they actually are double acting. You can see inside here that there's these internal arms, which makes sure that the dies move in a parallel fashion, and there's actually an internal arm on the bottom there. And so I do appreciate that design, but if they would have included a metal die in the front, or holder I should say, that would have been a nice touch, even though I understand why they didn't, and this looks like a nylon one, so it's certainly going to be very heavy duty. Just for such an expensive crimper, you don't want to see plastic at the front end, although it is very well built. It is fully disassemblable. You can see that they use E-clips. And being the nature of a telecommunications crimper, you don't really interchange the dies. They tend to be built just for that one type of crimping purpose. And so they don't usually have any kind of adjustments for the ratchets or the cam mechanism. This ideal is this newer one, and it's made in Taiwan. They actually printed on it twice. You rarely see them do it twice. And overall, it's a pretty good crimper, although one thing that I'll have to mention about it is it doesn't seem, it crimps well, but you seem to have to put a lot of force. It seems pretty often that, I'm squeezing, pretty hard to use this crimper. And of course, one criticism of this style or this ideal is that the connectors don't lock in. When you push them in, they just sit in there. They don't actually snap in using their little spring clips. And the reason then that's an issue, and 6-pin's really tight, is when you're crimping, oftentimes you're concentrating, making sure the wire stays in the connector, and then you're pushing the connector in, and it's real easy with the kind that don't snap out, since you're having to keep track of pushing 2 things together, that this will slip a little bit and you'll partially crimp, or you'll get the end, it'll hit the ends of the teeth on the connector and they'll tilt sideways, and you actually have to cut it off and re-crimp it again. So sometimes that's been a frustration. So when you get it all together, you really have to make sure that you're pressing tightly before you begin your crimping operation. That would be the one real criticism. Besides, it doesn't seem to have the best leverage ratio. Just go ahead and pop that out. The next one is the one that I like the best, and this is a Easy, if we can see it, there we go, Easy RJ45 by SullStar Technologies. I don't know if they're the originator of this style of crimper. I've seen a couple knockoff ones, but they never worked as well as the ones that were actually printed RJ45. I had one knockoff one where the ratchet mechanism was just so, right here, was so poorly manufactured that it just wore out in the first few uses. So I do appreciate these. These are the same style. They have a cutter right here, and they clearly label it, and they have even a nice little guard. And then on the other side is where they have the strippers. Here we go. Now, one thing to mention about the cutters and strippers on ones that are on parallel sides is they're actually designed when working with the larger 8-pin, or working with Ethernet, is first they only work with flat cable. Of course, they don't work with round cable because they only come together in parallel. But on a style like this, what it's designed to do is for you to put, only with Ethernet cable, it's too widely spaced for phone cable. But with the Ethernet, you just put the wire in and you press once, and it uses this side to cut it off the length, and then you just pull it out and it strips it, and it's just ready to go to put into the terminal. And that's one thing for some reason, it took me a while to figure that out, and once I did, wow. I don't wire much Ethernet anymore, but about 15 years ago I did a lot of computer stuff and use these quite often. Not only computer, but wiring stuff. What I also appreciate about these crimpers is that they do have more steel in them. They're very heavy duty. The only plastic is this plastic insert just to take up to maintain spacing, kind of take up the gap, which is just fine. But everything else is steel, like on the Ideals. I also like how it's assembled, where you have this two-piece die that actually uses a nut, and that's actually a nylon lock nut, but it's inset, so it's all smoothed out. It doesn't use E-clips, but those are snap rings, so this is still fully disassemblable, and you can see that they use screws on the outer perimeter. So you really can break this down to all of its constituent parts and service it, which is one nice aspect of actually getting a professional grade tool. And I seem to have a better leverage ratio, and for some reason just the way the Ideal kind of handles, this seems to handle better. It actually has a lighter weight head, so it's, if you're crimping, doing a lot of crimping, it's less fatiguing. And it just seems to be a little more convenient when it sticks out, because then I just have a small head that I'm working with. I can just take the connectors and just pop them in without much issue. If you're working with both Ethernet and phone cable, yes, you can crimp both at the same time, but it takes a lot of force, and I generally don't recommend it, but it is possible on these to crimp two at once. We're not even going to try that. One other aspect about this Easy RJ45 is depending, it seems that, and I've run into it every once in a while, there'll be a little bit of plastic or some kind of molding issues. And so what they've done on this is they use a knife blade to help smooth and just trim out any pieces of plastic that may be on the end of the plastic connector, ensuring that it works more reliably the first time you use it. And I thought that was actually a nice, intelligent touch. But these have always worked out nice. When you put in the wire, you just, I only have round Ethernet cable right now. I don't have any flat. And I'm not going to bother stripping it just to do this, but they are pretty nice. Almost no force. Even with wire, you don't see any force. And when you crimp them, when you use these professional grades, everything's just perfect. The teeth are all perfectly inset, and then it folds in. That's the little cable lock, so it kind of folds in, provides a strain relief. It generally works out pretty well. Now, oftentimes people will, and I've seen even professionals not using ratcheting, but using very low quality, simple plier type crimpers and having issues with the connectivity or things just not working. And it's really because it's just so hard to get those little tines, the little contacts to actually seat properly in the wires. That's usually what the biggest problem is. And so that's kind of the point of this review, is just to show what actual proper professional grade ones look like. Now, the last style is an N style, and this is for phone only. You get a separate set, you get a separate die set to use with Ethernet cable. But what's nice about these is they're pretty compact, and they're actually very high quality. They have a lot of several parts to them. What's interesting about the strip and cut is it's also measured for Ethernet, even though this has the 6-pin die in it. So unfortunately, you can't just cut and strip for the particular die set, which is, I thought was a little bit amusing. And the fact that the little tongue sticking off the bottom of the die isn't actually quite the proper measurement. And I thought that was just one mistake where they could have, when you had these particular 6-pin dies, that they would have made the tongue on the bottom so that you could put in the wire in the stripper and it would just stop and it would strip at the appropriate distance. But this is even a little bit long. Anyway, these are very high quality. They use an interesting draw plate system to both run the bottom of the stripper and the cutters. And they're actually very heavy duty cutters. Even though they're harder to replace, they are made out of this hardened steel, plate steel, excuse me. And then they have like a little guide roller inside that actually makes sure that they stay tight and maintain good alignment. What's also nice about these is that it's very easy to change the dies, because you just remove one screw in the top and they both come out as a set. They actually are cast zinc. They have 2 guide rods on each side. I don't know if we can really see inside there. Yeah, you can. You can just barely see the evidence of those 2 guide rods. So these Amphenols are really just amazing quality. A lot of their crimpers really are. And what makes this one particularly handy is because it's die cast or cast zinc, they have all the features. And so when you put in the connector, it actually clicks in, and that's a big deal. Let me go and push that back out. And I really, really appreciate that, because that makes a big difference, because you're just pushing it in and it clicks and holds the connector exactly where it needs to be. And all you have to worry about is just making sure you push in the wire and then exercising your crimping operation. And it really works very smoothly. One issue that I actually had, and part of the reason I have this unit, is I only paid $1 for this unit because it was broken and it wouldn't crimp properly. And the dies are actually kind of expensive. I looked online, they're like $30 or $40. It was just ended up crushing the plastic on the ends of these. Excuse me. There we go. There's little plastic wings you can see, separators, and it would just crush all that in. So somebody was selling it for super cheap at a garage sale. And I bought it, and after a while I realized that there was actually a piece of this cast zinc had actually curled over, and it may be a little difficult to see. It's so dark inside there. Let's see if I can't get enough light to shine down into there. Almost impossible. Just a second. Here we go. Finally get enough light. So inside there, it actually has inside the lower die a hardened steel teeth for actually driving in the terminals. And they were covered up by a piece of folded over zinc. And that issue was because on these Amphenols, part of their high quality is all these terminals, they actually have a little alignment gap right here. And no crimpers I've seen, professional ratcheting or otherwise, have ever had any kind of provision in the dies for that little spacing. The Amphenols did, and at some point somebody tried crimping without having the terminal fully installed. It caused that little wing to bend over on top of the teeth. And so in bending it back, of course it broke, but it was really an unnecessary provision of the die, but it was kind of an example of the attention to detail that Amphenol had, even though I'm sure, and in my case I got them because people had issues with that little thin piece of metal that's supposed to align just becoming easily damaged when people are misusing or just not making sure the terminal is fully inserted. Anyway, that's the end of another quick review and comparison, this time of telecommunications ratcheting crimpers. I really appreciate everybody watching, and please subscribe. Catus Maximus out.